Morning. So, Christmas happened, and I feel like as a parent, I'm getting to the end of that Christmas's magical phase. My children are moving into their preteen years, and before Christmas, we were kind of looking on YouTube for ideas, like what do you want for Christmas? And are there any new games that are coming out? Because my kids are really into, their Nintendo Switch. And we saw this clip for this game called Unpacking. And essentially what it is it's just like a click and point kind of thing. And in this game, you have this room, and then there's boxes in the middle of the room, and you click on the box and see what's in the box, and then you put it away. You unpack. My wife and one of my daughters looks at that and goes, "That looks like the most boring thing in the history of the world." Me and my other daughter said, "That is amazing." You get to organize a room how you want to, and no one's going to come mess it up because it is a video game. So, selfishly, I got that for her for Christmas, hoping that I would be able to play it. And I did, a lot. And it was wonderful. I got to organize this room. And the amazing thing about this game is that it tells this story. It's not just putting these things away. It's telling the story of this young lady from her childhood room all the way up to her room with her family and all that kind of stuff in the different rooms of the house. And as you unpack and put away each room, you get this sense of who this person is. This simple game was like, I was almost tearing up towards the end of it because you're watching. So you set up the girl's room in the beginning. It's just her family room. She's putting away her toys, her devices, all that kind of stuff. And then you move on to her college years. She's unpacking for her dorm for the first time. And the great thing about it is when you open these boxes, there's some of the items from the childhood room. And you're like, oh, that's still here. And then I thought about all the times that I moved throughout my life and how I looked around my house even today, and there are things that are there that were still there in my childhood bedroom. And it reminds you of the journey and the movement that you take through and how important the spaces that we occupy are. There was a point in my life early on in our marriage where we moved 8 times in 4 years. But there was always those items that you look at and you're like, oh, it's still there. It's still there. And some items are going to get broken and moved, but there are some items that if they get broken in the move, we're devastated because they've been with us for so long. And this simple little video game reminded me in a very profound way, probably more than it should have, that the space we occupy is important. And I think about that as I read the text for this morning in Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This creation narrative that we have in the beginning of the Bible has a lot of baggage associated with it in a lot of different ways. But one of the things that strikes me the most about this beginning passage of Genesis is the flow, the rhythm of it. And it reminds me of this game, Unpacking, because it's essentially unpacking on a cosmic scale. You have day 1, morning and night. Day 2, water and sky. Day 3, land. So the first 3 days of this creation narrative, space is created. The space of the sky at night and the space of the sky in the daytime. The space of water, the space of sky, and then the space of land. And then, now that the space has been established, the space is filled. On day 4, the sun, moon, and the stars populate the morning and night. On day 5, the fish and the birds populate the sky and the water. And then on day 6, animals and humanity populate the land. There's this flow and this rhythm to it. And then, day 7, there's a resting. But it's not all about just populating space to complete it. It's not about just organizing the room, so to speak, for it to be organized for organized sake. But it is about what that space does in terms of perpetuating life. Because the command or the directive after that is to be fruitful and multiply. Once the space is populated, once the space is full of life, it is not the end, it is the beginning of life continuing to flourish. And not just flourish on an individual basis, but co-flourish as creatures and humanity somehow occupy this same space to create harmony and peace, or at least that's the goal. We know that we don't always fulfill that. But this creative narrative is in stark contrast to the creative narratives of the ancient Near East. Here, in this narrative that we read this morning, space is cultivated for life to flourish. It is not a space created from violence and strife. Creation is not a result of the petty infighting of other deities where humanity is just a pawn. It is a space that is specifically designed for life to thrive. For us, not in spite of us. I think that's amazing. I think we forget that sometimes. I think we forget that there's this artful balance of inserting our creativity into a space, but also leaving enough room for others to occupy that space. And it's tough. And then I think of Parkside. And for me, this is a very unique space. Throughout my entire life, when I've come to a different church, it has been, for my adult life, it's been because I was hired by that particular church. And I come in, and I meet everyone, and there's faces and all that kind of stuff. My first Sunday here at Parkside, I was in my office in San Luis Obispo, not yet moved here, trying to get everything together to figure out what was next. And the first face that I saw here at Parkside was on a screen, bringing them into a service that occupied a virtual space. And Parkside as a space has changed a lot in the last 4 years, 5 years. The major change that happened was an unexpected one. We came in and we all were blindsided by a pandemic. And it's funny because when we have a transition in our space, when it's unexpected, we tend to move into survival mode, where we tend to be a little bit more open to change because we don't know what else to do because everything is new and different. Many of you probably occupied this very space the week before the lockdowns. And you go from in here to listening to Janet's beautiful organ playing or speaking at the time with either Bonnie or Elizabeth, and you're just like, church, there's this thing happening on the news, I don't know what's going to happen, and all of a sudden, you're on your phone, you're like, how do I work this thing? Where's Elizabeth? Is this right? Like, what's happening? And then that was it. But we're in a different place now as Parkside. We're in a time and a season of expected change. We're eagerly anticipating what new leadership is going to look like here at Parkside. And sometimes our posture when we're entering into expected change is not as giving and flexible as the survival mode that comes with unexpected change. Sometimes we, instead of getting into survival mode, we can get into protective mode. Because we know change is coming. Oh, this is my area. This is my spot. This is my expression. This is where I do my work. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're all here in this community and occupy this space because we all have unique personality traits, abilities, and gifts that contribute to the whole of this community. But when we enter into protective mode, what we do is we start closing doors. Because then things get a little different. I go back to that game, Unpacking. As much as I liked it, the thought of someone coming into my room and messing with my stuff. Because at one point in this game, you move from your dorm room, and the next one is you're in this house with a partner, And now I'm looking at these rooms and I'm like, I didn't put that there. What is this person thinking? But now I have to figure out a way to balance the creative ability and nature that I have and then balance it with this other person and these other people in the place to kind of figure out how this is going to work and where this is going to go. And sometimes find a way to be okay with it. But sometimes be pleasantly surprised that I'm able to see a new perspective and that I'm able to experience something that I never would have experienced had I not allowed myself to give up a little, to hold loosely something that before I held very tightly. But it doesn't change the fact that sometimes that's loss. Whenever a very important person in my life, when I was in a transition myself from a certain way of looking at the world to another way of looking at the world, a very good friend of mine, his saying was always, every goodbye is a new hello. That for every transition, whether good or bad, there is loss in the middle of it. We can't deny that. Sometimes it's a good and healthy loss that we need to leave behind. But it doesn't mean that just because we're moving on to something better and we're moving on to something more, it doesn't mean that we don't miss what came before. It's just life. But when we enter into a space of community, when we enter into a space like this, which is Parkside, there's a lot here. How do we maintain and prop up what's come before us, but also leave room for something new to come in? And as I was thinking about this whole idea, and as I stand here this morning, Becky, I don't mean to call you out, but I'm going to. Becky is one of the people in this congregation that I think lives in this tension in a real and beautiful way. I've worked with her a little bit as she's kind of trying to get all the history of Parkside together, to find old bulletins and old pictures and tell me stories about different groups that had met. But she's also on this committee that's moving us forward to bring our facilities and our people and our mindset into a place to let everyone come through the door, regardless of their abilities. And that's a very difficult but beautiful place to be. The tension between what was and what is to come. And I think it's something we all try to strive for in our life. Because regardless of what happens, we can't change that change will come. It will. And when we approach change from an individualistic standpoint, we're going to exhaust ourselves. Because we're going to try to make everyone happy. We are going to assume that we should be satisfied and happy with every decision and every change that comes our way. But we're in a community. We're in a space that requires us to co-flourish together. And I think two of the spiritual disciplines that we forget sometimes, prayer, reading your Bible, all those ones that come with that. But two things that we forget are self and spatial awareness. And they take work and they take practice. Knowing when it's time to step up. Knowing when our voice is important. Knowing when we need to say something and say it now. Sometimes that's the easy one. But sometimes it's hard knowing when it's time to step back, when it's time to let someone else come to the front, because it's their time. And then most importantly, knowing when it's time to walk alongside. Knowing when it's time to be with someone as they begin and continue their journey. Because sometimes we get stuck in this binary of old and new. This is the old way, this is the new way. But we forget when we have open doors and people come through these doors, we forget that our old ideas may be new ideas for them. And if we allow our doors to stay open and we allow our relationships to be held loosely and know that this person has something for me and I have something for this person, then we allow not only our perspective and our space to be changed, but I believe, some days I don't, but I still mostly believe that that's when we can change the world. That's when we can change the spaces that we occupy outside of this room, the space that we have at work, the space that we have in our family. This is what co-flourishing is. Creating spaces where people can be who they are. Because we at Parkside are a caring community. We're a caring community because we make space for others, not just to be, but to contribute from their being. We are pursuing justice because we recognize that this space, and especially the spaces outside of this doors, haven't gotten there yet, and there's still work to do. We practice diversity because by acknowledging our space will change based on varied experiences, it represents the lives of those people around us. Because diversity brings change, which brings new life. And we are promoting spiritual journeys because by cultivating a space that leaves room for multiple expressions of faith and not universalizing our own journey, we create lasting community that makes a difference.